And ladies and gentlemen, we're back with our next session. I'm joined today by Henrik. Henrik, are you good to go? And there you are.
Yeah,
nice to see you.
I am. And you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted having had that very comprehensive rundown on all the work that has been happening by the International Sustainability Standards Board and the work that they're doing to digitize their standards, to look at this from a different perspective, a new lens. So we're now joined by Henrik Sandin, who's leading member of the Workiva team working on their sustainability products. Henrik has an extensive background in the ESG world, having been a leading member of the Deloitte team in that area until relatively recently. But Henrik is going to provide us a rundown on what the European Union, both through its legislative instruments, creating a legislative mandate for a very large number of companies to report in a sustainable way, and in terms of their standards in this space, and what that means for companies in Europe and around the world. So Henrik, I think you're going to give us a little presentation, so I might turn off my video if you want to share your screen, but perhaps you could just introduce yourself a little bit further and tell us what you're doing there at Workiva.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, John, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and present this topic. As you, John, already mentioned, my name is Henrik Sandin. I'm principal ESG specialist at Workiva, where I'm working with the topic ESG to make sure that our products are fully covered and aligned with what regulation and legal sort of requirements are. As you also mentioned, prior to joining Workiva, I'm fairly new there, but I spent the last almost 12 years in the risk advisory practice at Deloitte in the UK, Switzerland, and the US, where I advised global banks on banking regulation, reporting frameworks, process enhancement, target operating models. So basically the operationalization of something as CSRD prior to CSRD actually came out. So yeah, that's my background. And as I said, I will, if that is, I will kick off my presentation.
Over to you. Why don't you share your screen and look forward to a presentation. We'll come back with some questions in 40 minutes or so. Thank you so much.
Yes. Let's see.
I think we've got the
wrong
presenter screen, not the other way around. Yeah,
I've got it swapped.
Everybody's had this problem. There we go. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So the digital sustainability disclosures coming to the EU, CSRD, ESRS, and assurance. What does this mean for companies? So in this presentation, I'm going to try to break it down into digestible chunks, if that makes sense, and then see what actually this means for the different corporates and financial institutions, and what do they need to do straight away. We don't need to introduce myself again because I've already done it, but I think the one thing I always start with here is actually the Commissioner McGuinness sort of quote saying, again, the key is to make sure that sustainability reporting is on equal footing with financial reporting. And this, I think, is very, very key here, right? That with the CSRD, we are bringing the sustainability reporting sort of lens and framework on the equal powering with the financial reporting. We bring it up that level to make sure that what firms are disclosing is true, accurate, and with the new sort of requirements around assurance, they actually make sure that that is correct. My agenda for today, I'm going to give you a bit of when and who. So when does this, what has happened, when will it happen, and who does it actually impact? Give a bit of a high level that CSRD at a glance, go into each of the sort of 4 workable chunks as I talked about, and see what actually does this mean. And at the end, then what does this mean for an organization, and what do they need to do, and what happens next? If there are, as there's a Q&A, obviously, any question, please ask them, and we can cover them off at the end. But if we then start with the progress to date and the key upcoming dates. So without going into too much history, but 2021, European Commission adopts the CSRD proposal. And very, very recently, and as I say, I put you are here, so as you do on maps, just to make sure that people understand that all of the future dates here, the upcoming ones. CSRD was passed in Parliament on 10th November, I think it was a landslide. I think it was 52 against or something. I can't remember the exact number, but it obviously passed flying colours there. Very, very quickly afterwards, EFRAG submitted a final draft of the European Sustainability Reporting Standards to the European Commission. And that is a massive undertaking, which we will go through further later in this presentation, because that is where you actually stipulate what to report and how to report it. The key dates coming up, the one that I think we, or at least myself, is very keen on happening is the June 2023 date, where the Commission should publish delegated act for the ESRS, which means that we can then start working on it. Well, you can already do all the draft versions, right? But that's when it's this is where the final. With the ESRS, the European Sustainability Reporting Standard, there's also a sectorial sort of specific reporting that's going to come out of that. So the June 2023 date is the sort of sectorial agnostic ones, but there's importance to get certain specificities relating to sectors, etc. So I think it's 40 different sectors that are going to get individual sort of requirements to them as well. Obviously increasing the burden, meaning that some of the parts we're talking about in here becomes even more important as you expand this framework even more. Key dates for who should report and what's the key dates for them. I have tried to color coordinate slightly just to make sure that people understand that there are three different sort of levels here. January 2024 for what we are currently calling NFRD corporates. That means that they are under the non-financial report directive currently. So those corporates, we know who they are. Public interest entities over 500 employees listed, and they're listed on the European exchange, meaning the CSRD comes into effect on the 1st of January 2024, but the report they need to publish is in with the annual statement, annual report in 2025 first. So there's still some time out, but obviously they need to be able to be up and running by the 1st of January 2024 when it comes into effect. What you then have also is the year after is what we then call large corporates, which they are not falling currently under the non-financial reporting directive, but they don't need to be listed, but they are over 250 employees. And they would then report in 2026 on financial year 2025 data. After that, you have the in 2027 on financial year 26 are what we call listed SMEs. So here's where you then are starting moving into smaller corporates. And also in this January 26 bracket also sits smaller financial institutions such as banks and insurance companies that do not meet certain thresholds. They can also have a bit of a leeway of 2 years. Sorry, that's my going nuts. 2-year expansion wait that they can apply it. And then finally, this is, I think, is the most important one for a lot of companies to understand, is in January 28, it starts coming into effect the third country undertakings, meaning that for a corporate head office outside of the European Union, but with operations inside the European Union, you if you meet certain thresholds, you will have to report at group level. These third country undertakings and what they need to report on, you can actually find currently in the CSRD text. I think it's section 29A2, where it outlines what they should report, but that is just the regulatory text. The actual delegated act for what these third country undertakings needs to report on will come in June 2024. Talking a bit more about these third country undertakings, I think, because here's where I've had a lot of conversations with market participants, but also internally and with other sort of service providers around what does this actually mean? Well, if you have operations within the European Union, already a legal entity, a subsidiary that is incorporated within the European Union, they will obviously fall under the CSRD requirement depending upon the size of the firm. So that means that standalone entity, equally as they are applied under current regulations or current local laws, they will still operate in that fashion. but it's if that legal entity or that subsidiary have over 150 million of turnover revenue within the European Union, that means that the group come in and have to start reporting in 2029. So that is the nuance that people need to understand, that just because you are a subsidiary of a group entity, it doesn't mean that the group entity have to report. It depends on how much revenue turnover you have in the European Union, but the standalone entity themselves still needs to adhere to the European requirements if they are either an NFRD corporate currently, or if they fall into the large corporate, non-listed, or if they actually fall into the listed SMEs. So that's just something that needs to be looked at internally to make sure that what level of reporting needs to be done at which for which entity. And it's something that needs to be done with probably with legal in mind, that you have your legal department included in that to make sure that you know where you actually sit in the reporting time frame, and what then and how you are impacted. So that's just a bit of a progress to date and the key upcoming dates around that. Hopefully, of course, clarified some. If not, I'll happily answer any questions around this that I can answer. There might be some nuances that I might not know myself, but I know the reason why I kept talking a bit around the third country undertakings is I think that's where most confusion has been in the discussions I've had. So CSRD then, what does this mean? And what is it? So we break it out into the 4 chunks of saying CSRD at a glance. We say the integrated reporting, you have the assurance piece, you have the ESRS, which is the the European Sustainability Reporting Standard, which are the the meat and bones in one sense, I could say. And then obviously talking to this audience around XBRL, it's the electronic tagging. So I think this is something that people on here know a lot about. But what do these 4 parts then mean for a firm, and how do they interact? Obviously, there's a massive interaction between them. You're doing reporting, you need to have assurance over it, you need to disclose it in your report, in your annual report, and also you need to then tag it. So all of these 4 areas are very interlinked, and means that there's a massive assessment. When I say massive, I mean obviously that depends on the size of the company you are, but looking at these different parts, there's obviously a need to assess current state versus where you want to be and where you want to go, and what updates to current processes, data, etc. you need to take to be able to meet the requirements that is set upon you. So if we move onwards more into these different chunks then, so I think the first here is integrated reporting, obviously. Well, I'm going to start with a quote from our own annual reporting insight, which says that right now 98% of financial professionals in Europe are concerned about ESG metrics being added to the annual report. Understandable, because it's probably a current process that is working well, that you have set up, you know who's involved in it. There might be some manual work around it, etc. That, but you have that process to the teeth, and you know how you operate and you produce your annual report. All of a sudden, you now need to incorporate all of these different ESG metrics into this disclosure, which means quite a big disruption to your current processes. You're going to have to incorporate more people in the production process, because the production of the ESG metrics will not just sit in one team. There's going to be different parts of an organization that needs to be involved in this to be able to cover off all the bases that needs to be included. You will have, obviously, with such incorporation of multiple teams, there's a need for an updated process. But with that updated process, there's also a very big need to update, incorporate, enhance or further controls around that process to make sure that what is actually incorporated is true and accurate, and it's at the most up-to-date information that you need to include in your annual report. And one thing I've talked about, and I've also seen, I've heard it be mentioned before, but one thing here that I think is very important to understand as well is the role of, for instance, historically, when you've done a sustainability report, the role then of the chief sustainability officer as the driving force behind that. That's still obviously the case going to be, we see on a lot of these sort of things. You have a chief sustainability officer, but that role of such a team or such a person, it's going to be far more as the driving force of getting others to meet the requirements to produce sort of their part of the report. So it's almost like a conductor, standing there being like the project manager around it to say, okay, I need this information from that person and this information from this person, and then combining it to make sure that it can go into a report. So that's what's been talked about. So the future role of the chief sustainability officer, what actually they are going to do. But as you can see, there's going to be a massive need for an updated process here where you actually have a robust, controlled process to incorporate the ESG matrices within your annual report. And just last point on this, it's worth mentioning around the timelines, right, and the time frame around how to actually be able to get this information in there. That's again something that needs to be looked at very imminently, in my opinion, to make sure that to be able for a team to produce the right set of information that is accurate, how are you actually going to be able to do that from a timing perspective? So moving on then after, so doing the report, then obviously there's the assurance piece. And personally, this is actually one of the greater things about this regulation, in my opinion, that they're now doing assurance on it. And the reason why I'm saying that is by disclosing this detailed level of information, by putting an assurance requirement on top of that, it means that what the market participants, stakeholders, shareholders, investors, private investors, all of them can actually take a comfort in what has been produced and what has been published is correct. We're seeing a lot, obviously, of the backside of that, meaning that there are in the European Union around SFDR, when people are reclassifying the sort of the Article 8 and 9 funds, so from Article 8 to Article 9, if I had that the right way, just because they are scared now when the disclosure requirement coming out that what they're disclosing they might not be able to stand fully behind it. By introducing something like an assurance on top of these ESG metrics and report that you include in your annual statement, annual report, that will then give comfort to the market, in my opinion, that you actually what you are producing there, you can stand behind, and it's correct. The European Commission, so here's a bit of a timing difference or timing issue, I would call it. And according to the Accountancy Europe, the independent third-party assurance will obviously have to start by the non-financial reporting directive. Corporates are being publishing in 2025 on the 2024 data or the numbers, but the European Commission have until the latest 1st of October 2026 to adopt standards for limited assurance, which means that there might be a year gap between when the national assurance standards or the member state assurance responsible board or parties will have to come up with requirements to meet the assurance requirements around these ESG metrics that is now being incorporated into the annual report. And then when the European Commission has published their standards, they then take precedence over that. So it's first round, we're talking limited assurance standards, so negative, so it's a negative publication, right? You're saying that we haven't found anything wrong. Moving then on to the more sort of intrusive, stringent, reasonable assurance standards later. And I think that's also a smart way to actually approach this, both from impact on a corporate themselves, meaning that there's a learning phase that they can have to work together with the auditors and the assurance personnel to make sure that it's done correctly and it's then gradually increasing in burden. And one thing around sort of impact here is actually one of the main points for me is there's massive need to skill up people within both within corporates to understand actually what does this mean and how can we actually do it correctly and to understand it fully. Equally, it's very important that national assurance so governing bodies ensure that their registered auditors are up to scratch and know actually what it is they're looking at and how to actually do an assurance around this. Because there's no point, right, if the person that is doing the assurance doesn't fully understand what it is they're doing. So I trust fully that that will happen. But I'm just saying that this is something I think is very imminent that needs to happen. And I think also, if I'm not mistaken, I think I read something about it yesterday, that this is actually something that is currently happening, which when I read it, it made me happy. So now what we've done there, right? We've covered that we need to include it in our annual report. Perfect. We then need to have assurance on top of it. Good. That makes sure that we can trust what actually is being produced. Then what we then go into now is what I would call the meat of the whole CSRD. Okay, what actually is it we need to report? Well, as I said, or as you could see in the timeline I had earlier, the EFRAG published their final draft of the European Sustainability Reporting Standards and sent them to the European Commission for their review and then hopeful publication of the final set of standards in June 2023. So what are these different then items you need to report on? So as you can see, I've included, I did a bit of a so quick and dirty summary of what are the different parts you need to report on. So there's two of them, ESRS 1 and ESRS 2, which are across all. And then you have around climate, so E, the social side, and then the governmental side, so E, S, and G. There are only actually two of these disclosures that are fully mandatory that you will always have to do, which is the E1, climate change, and then it's the materiality assessment part of ESRS 2. What I mean with that is, although we're saying there's 82 disclosures requiring significant increase in data point, right? So there's 82 disclosures, but to see if you actually need to do a report or you need to disclose on it, you as a firm need to do a materiality assessment to see how, and the guidelines around that sits in the ESRS 2 draft standards. You can actually read and see what it is they mean around it. But you kind of to assess how sustainability issues affect their business as well as the impact on people and environments, what we call here the double materiality, right? But if you do not meet the materiality of a certain sort of reporting standard, you do not need to report on it. That's understanding it. And so they also stipulates then in there that there are only two of them that are mandatory. That's my understanding of it, and I hope that it's also how other people understood it, because that obviously can mean that there might be parts of it that you do not impact at all, and hence there's no reason for you to report on it. But still, there's some interesting numbers here, right, to look at. And if you are a big multinational, you operate out of Europe, you are hitting a lot of these, 82 disclosures. This is a number that keeps going around. I hope we obviously hope that it's fully correct, but it's 1,144 data points to populate these 82 disclosures. And what is interesting here is that a data point in this term on the ESRS actually can be either quantitative or qualitative, meaning that when they talk about describe something, that can actually be, that's considered a data point as well. As we talked about previously on the timeline slide, there will be sector-specific standards coming out. And I think that's broken down around 40 different sectors. So that will be on top. And what does this mean for a firm, right? Well, it's a massive increase in data points that you need to be able to produce these disclosures. You need to have the right set of people, process, data, the normal thing when you look at any sort of reporting framework and what you need to, how you produce them. By having the right people, you can do the materiality assessment, you can identify what it is you need to do. You can then say, this is the data we need to use to populate these reports. So there's a very sort of preparational work that needs to happen before you can fully understand what the impact is on you. And that is obviously, we can talk about that a bit more later, but that is obviously something that needs to happen very imminently for some firms. If you need to report in 2025 on financial year 24 numbers, because there might be quite large gaps in your current process or data that you then need to work on filling. So, as I said, this is the big meat and bones of the whole, at least in my opinion, when it comes to the actual reporting of it. Then you incorporate it into your integrated reporting, and then obviously you have the assurance on top of it, which means to make sure that whatever you disclose is true and accurate. And I think this is probably where, electronic tagging, obviously best group to speak about electronic tagging with, obviously, XBRL. So I think this is where, what we're trying to do here is obviously the greater trust and transparency of the ESG report. You can be able to do compare and contrast between different companies, that when you have that tagging, to make sure that it's in the right format, the right way, and it's easily you can find it easily. Again, impacts, and I will also cover this a bit more on the next slide, right? But it's the collaboration between sustainability team and finance team to leverage this sort of experience. Firms, finance teams that are used to XBRL tagging, etc., needs to start educating other parts of the firm to make sure that they understand what it means, and how they need to and how they should be incorporated into the processes. So that's the fourth part of the CSRD as we see it, and meaning with the, as you said, you do the reporting under ESRS, you incorporate in the integrated report, you have it assurance on top of it, you have electronic tagging to it, so you can source it, compare it, contrast it, you can have it easily found in and compare between different companies. Sorry. So talking about then the increased collaboration, how do we see that? Well, as I said before, the sustainability reporting as a function, or sustainability office as a function, right? It now, in my opinion, is coming more of a sort of project manager, if you want to sort of simplify it quite a lot, around what needs to be done, when does it need to be done, and who needs to have the right information at the right time. Because there's obviously, with the group reporting, external reporting, there will obviously, as you're going to be measured upon by the market, there's obviously a need to start breaking this down into more sort of lower level of information internally as well. Sort of entity reporting, you have internal reporting, so sector reporting with internally, so that you can accurately manage your ESG exposure, ESG matrices, or ESG risks, so that you know that you're working towards the right sort of goal with it internally, before doing throughout the year, before you actually do your annual report. So this is for us, and we'll give out how we then see, you are now basically sustainability reporting sitting in the middle, and every other part of our business is included in the production of it. And what this is renders an opportunity, right, for business transformation or legal entities, like target operating model efficiencies internally, where you can start saying, well, now we need to have much more collaboration between different parts. How do we best do that? Through technology, through system, through processes, through controls, through any sort of enhancement to your existing business model, to make sure that you can meet these requirements that obviously the market has put upon you, the government, the regulators have put upon you, but also what I would say, what firms actually have put on themselves, talking about their transition to sort of net zero and how they're sort of the moving towards that. So what do firms need to do next? Well, I think I will start with this quote that actually I got today directly from the EFRAG's conference in Brussels. My colleague Andy Wood was there, and she said, this is probably one of the things you want to include, Henrik, because it basically ties it all together. We recommend starting the implementation process as soon as possible. From Patrick de Cambourg, the EFRAG Sustainability Reporting Chair. And I can't agree with that more, because as we have discussed and what we talked about, or not discussed, what I have explained so far, right? There's a need to update your integrated reporting process. That is obviously something that's going to be a process enhancement, controls, including controls to minimize risks, etc. There's a need to be able to have an assurance process on top of that. Again, there's a process enhancement need to do that. Obviously, there's some waiting a bit of the requirements and the standards from the either member states or the European Commission themselves. The ESRS, this is for me where you then need to sort of have a quite a quick actionable process to kick off very quickly here, specifically if you are a corporate that falls under non-financial reporting directive currently, because you are the first one out, which means you need to look at what data gaps do you have, what process gaps are there, how can you actually fill those gaps, what are the projects you need to put in place to be able to meet these requirements. also do materiality assessment based on the draft standards already exist to see what actually is it I need to report on. Do you need to assess, do I need to have new tools? Do I need to have new data providers? Do I need to source anything else? Do I need to have new people involved? It's quite a big assessment that you need to do across your function to see how do I actually meet these requirements. And then obviously on the electronic tagging side, ensure that your reporting tool and processes are digitally enabled. If they're not, probably time to start looking at, okay, is there a need for any new reporting tool that actually can help us do that? But as you can see, if we look at these 4 pieces, right, and this is, before I turn over and can also, hopefully, if you have any questions, but as we can see, there's massive changes coming based on the CSRD for a corporation to be able to meet them around processes, data gathering, sort of identification, reporting, production, control sitting on top of that. How do you incorporate, your internal audit and also compliance departments to make sure that actually what you have and what you do is correct? So it's basically across the whole function in that, across the whole organization that the CSRD is actually impacting. And as I showed in my previous slide, it does give you the sort of shortcut in this, if you want to say, it gives you the ability to actually start creating quite good collaborations if you don't have that already, because now there's so many more people that needs to be involved in the process to produce the reports that you then can include in your integrated report or annual report. And that is obviously one of the many benefits I see with this, apart from obviously by doing the assurance on top of it. I think it's going to be revolutionary for market participants when they assess firms. So that's CSRD and the impacts they will have on a corporate. And hopefully I have given you some people more insights. For you who already know a lot, I hope I gave you some new parts to actually think of or consider, so that you can take away something positive from this presentation. John, is there any questions, or do you have anything?
Are there questions? There's lots of questions. Thank you very much, Henrik. You are a goldmine of information in this field, and I think that people have really appreciated all the insights you've provided. Let me start with a high-level question of my own, just greedily, but then I think we should be able to answer most of the questions we have here. So I'm interested. You make the point about the changing role of the Chief Sustainability Officer, but I'm interested in the change within the corporation as a whole. A friend of mine who's the chair of an audit committee of a public listed company in the United States rang me up a few months ago and said, "Hey, we won an ESG award." And I congratulated him and said, "Oh, that's great." He said, "Yeah, the only thing is that I didn't know that we produced this report. It's done by a communications function, not under the auspices of the audit committee or the CFO. So, and then when they looked at the contents of the report, they had some questions about perhaps the integrity of some of the information and the way that it was all pulled together. It's not a criticism of that person or that company in any way, shape or form. I think everybody is on a learning curve. But can you give us an idea of what you think this will look like in the future? Do you think that this is something that really is going to be top of mind or closer to top of mind for board members and for the C-suite within corporates?
Without a question of that, I really, really do. And I think we're already starting to see the reason why it needs to be top of mind. Obviously, if we start, at just look back of what I just presented, right? The burden of what the information now needs to disclose, obviously it's going to be it's increasing so much that you want to make sure that internally, when you have produced it and when you have reviewed it and when you then disclose it to the public, that you can actually stand behind it. Just what you talked about there, John, as an example. We had a few questions of the integrity of that information. this is now going to have to be, under their scrutiny to make sure that it's signed off. The auditor needs to do in the audit letter or to the annual report, they need to comment on it. So that just goes to show that it falls into that. But even bigger, well, not perhaps bigger, but more importantly, quite recently, all the rating agencies have published where they're saying that ESG scores are currently impacting credit rating. So they see quite an increase. So I think they had a 40%, Moody's published and said 40% of firms that are, it was not AAA rated, it was something below that, but that with their ESG score actually had an impact on the credit rating. And what does that mean? Well, it's the access to capital and cost of capital and cost of funding all of a sudden can be impacted of your ESG disclosures. So of course, that's going to have to be like a top of mind of these firms when they actually disclose something. The C-suite to know we can't just get a very sort of a cheap credit facility because our ESG score is very, very bad. Well, all of a sudden that means you then have the information that is correct and you can then work towards lowering that, which means that you can then have a better credit rating. So yes, 100%, it's something that needs to be top of mind, in my opinion, if it's not already isn't.
Great, thank you very much. Let me get you to answer some questions from the audience. Certainly. I wonder whether you could go back to your timelines. Let me ask the question, you can decide whether your slide helps, but do large non-listed corporates have to comply with both CSRD reporting and ESEF tagging, and if so, from when?
So if we go back to the timeline, there we go. Can that be?
Yeah,
as we can see here,
probably.
Yeah, I'm gonna. No, again, do I need to switch them around? There we go.
It hasn't come up yet. There you go. Perfect.
Yeah. So CSRD effective for large non-listed companies. So the ones that we are talking about here in 2026 on January 25 data. Sorry, not January 25. Sorry, financial year 25 data, including my understanding. Is including the electronic tagging on that. So it's not like they are just the only ones I've understood so far to have a lesser sort of burdensome reporting sort of requirements upon them are the listed SMEs, which will have a simplified reporting, which is effectively the ones that are, have 2 out of the 3 of the items down in the left-hand corner, but they're listed. So they will have a simplified reporting. But what CSRD is trying to do, right? It's actually plugging the hole between an SME and then the NFRD application to say, well, actually, we have a bunch of companies here that we're basically no man's land currently because they're not an SME, which means that they get a bit of leniency as an SME. If they wasn't that one of the comments that was made when they discussed it in the European Parliament said, don't touch the SMEs, which obviously, unless you're listed. But you then have the NFRD was applied at 500 plus employees and you're listed. So what CSRD here is to plug that gap and to say, okay, you actually need to be reporting similarly as anyone else here. And I have not read anywhere where they have a simplified reporting or don't need to do the ESEF tagging. So my working assumption has always been that, yes, they need to do the full thing.
Okay, there was obviously some debate about whether that would be covered by ESEF tagging, but let's use that as a working assumption that they will.
Yeah.
And we can come back with a blog entry or something if we can get some clarification from the European Union on that. Thank you very much for that question, for answering that question. The next question is, might require a crystal ball, although we have a speaker who will be able to answer these later on. When will a taxonomy for CSRD digital disclosures be available? And will it be a separate taxonomy from the ESEF taxonomy? Is that something that you would like to answer, or would you like to punt that one for Richard Boson, who's going to speak later today?
I think I'm going to punt that over today, actually, if that's okay. I don't have a good answer there. I really don't. I happily punted to someone that actually is more qualified to respond on that specific topic than I am.
and Richard's been working on that, so we'll let him answer that one. Just as a stopgap measure, we understand at Expel International that the award for a group of consultants to do the work to produce the taxonomy only happened a couple of weeks ago, and as far as I know, it has not yet. That's not yet public, but we expect that there will need to be a draft around about March or April, and that a final taxonomy which can be utilised will need to be prepared no later than November next year, which means that companies that are using tools to get ready during the fiscal year starting on or after the 1st of January 2024 and obliged to produce their reports at some point after the 1st of January 2025 will have the taxonomy that they'll be able to do that, be able to work from. So this is coming down the pipe pretty quickly. Thank you very much. Tell us a little bit about Scope 3. You covered it briefly, but will listed EU companies have to disclose their full Scope 3 carbon emissions in addition to Scope 1 and 2, do you think?
Yes. that was my answer. Yes. So I know that there's a discrepancy, a difference here between, I know in for instance, SEC, you have the difference between an accelerated filer versus a large filer versus that small, where you then, the smaller one of them will not have to do the Scope 3. But the other two will. If you're listed SME, I would think that there would be something similar here, potentially, that where the European Union actually will apply a bit of sort of a simplified reporting, but the Delegated Act for simplified reporting hasn't been published yet when it comes to their listed SMEs. So I think there's a bit of a wait and see, at least for me, but for the others, I would, yeah, that's my understanding as well.
Yeah, and certainly if you read the E1 carbon disclosure framework, it certainly covers lots of details about Scope 3, so go and have a look.
Oh yeah, no, it is. Yeah,
it's up on the EFRAG website. That's great. Thank you. Another question, a little bit left field. This one. Thank you very much for all of this information about the EU's corporate reporting sustainability disclosure. The Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, CSRD. Too many acronyms. Yeah,
I have a fun one of that. Yeah.
But I wonder whether you've got a view, or maybe you know, what UK listed companies will be expected to do. There's been a range of it hasn't been clear as to what the timelines there will necessarily be. And it's not clear whether the UK will adopt ISSB or what's going to happen. Any insights? No, that's a bad answer. But what I want to say, it's an honest one. It's obviously if we look at this from a sort of pragmatic perspective, right? The UK have said we want to win the race to the top, which is an interesting comment when I already think that the European Union won the race to the top when they published, well, actually China did when they published their taxonomy first, but European Union, they came with the taxonomy and, you know, they tried to get this moving forward quickly and concisely. The UK was a bit later, but obviously you have TCFD requirement that is mandatory since 6th of April, etc., etc., etc. On the CSRD front and what should be adopted, there, I haven't heard anything else if they're going to do sort of lift and shift, put some UK finish on it and just, you know, make sure that it can be fitted, or if it is what they will do, what they're trying to do with the taxonomy, when they do an adopt and adapt to make sure that it fit the UK economy and the UK market specifically. I don't have a good answer on that. The one thing that people need to understand, though, is that there will still be information requests on to UK corporates from EU corporates now when CSRD comes in, because if they're going to need to start understanding what it is the value chain and etc., UK corporates are going to have to start providing that information to them so they can actually accurately report. So I know it's not answering the question around CSRD and how it would be in the UK, but UK firms needs to be be aware that these sort of things might start coming down the pipeline for them. That is then not a regulatory requirement based on what the UK regulators have put on them,
but what their customer and clients actually are requesting of them to provide information. So that's just hopefully gave a bit of nuance, but I don't know what the CSRD stuff in the UK. We're waiting and seeing exactly what they're saying.
Well, I'm sure we'll have representatives of the relevant authorities,
I would
FCA and
assume
FRC,
so.
at another Data Amplified event in the not too distant future. Well, so perhaps one last question for you, Henrik, just to round this out.
Yes.
I wonder whether you could just build on that answer you provided in relation to companies that might be outside of the EU that will be affected by the European Union's rules in this area.
Yes.
It's not clear entirely what that means for two kinds of companies. So it appears that there will be an obligation to report in Europe on the activities of your European subsidiaries, but that won't come into effect until 2029. Or maybe, okay, no. We can come back to that one. You can fill us in. Yeah. But also there's going to be a data demand, isn't there? There's going to be information that anyone that provides part of a supply chain for a European entity is needing. So perhaps you could just round out our discussion by spending a couple of minutes on those things.
Of course. And so if we start on what I would call the easier side of it, which is basically how does it work with a subsidiary or that's part of a non-EU group, for instance. The subsidiary itself that's incorporated in the European Union obviously already report under the European Union sort of regulations and guidelines and all of that, because they are legal entity incorporated in a European country, so they need to follow those guidelines. If they meet the thresholds that we have discussed previously, right, under the NFRD, or if they are a large corporate and non-listed, the CSRD applies to them as they are a European incorporated entity. That's number one. So that's coming down the line. They should know about it if they already, because they already report on the European guidelines anyway. The group here, it's going to have to start thinking about, okay, when will we, if are we going to be impacted? Because if said subsidiary or subsidiaries as a group in the European Union, so that the combined revenue of those entities is over 150 million euros. In 2029, the group will have to report on group numbers into Europe. And this is where it's twofold, right? So you have the standalone as the legal entity incorporated in the European Union, but the group will be hit if there's over 150 million euro revenue in the European Union. And those standards the Delegated Act for what they need to report on will come out in, I think it's in June 2024. But if you go into the CSRD Article 29A2, it breaks down and say, okay, this is what we expect you to report, like a high-level business plan, or those sort of things. But precisely format, etc., will come later in the Delegated Act in 2024.
Great. So if you weren't already concerned about the need to quickly get your act together in terms of sustainability disclosures and understanding the changes that this imposes on reporting, including the digital aspects of that, then perhaps that answer will make you concerned. Henrik, on behalf of everybody that's here, and I'm sorry we haven't got to every question here, but we'll try to answer the rest of them on the email. But thank you very much for your contributions today, and a very thorough and very informative assessment of what's coming down the pipeline for Europe and the rest of the world under the CSRD. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we will regroup in 10 minutes. So time to get a cup of tea or a sandwich or anything else you want in 10 minutes, and we will come back with a discussion about what's happening in the United States with Emily Pierce as we continue on our global tour of the sustainability disclosure rules that are coming soon to a company near you.